Wonderful. Thank you all for being here. It's I know after lunch can be a quite difficult panel, but you've got some excellent speakers. I'm not including myself in that because if I did, I would sound like a Chinese communist. So I thought I can't do that. So I'm going to go first, and I'm not. I think self-introduction is no introduction, or self-flattery is not. So I'm from University of Buckingham, also visiting postgraduate at Ludwika. Most people, the question I get asked the most is, "Is my moustache real?" Yes, it is. How do I get it to curl like this? Sorry, can't tell you. It's under the Secret Service Act. Right. I'm standing up here just because I thought I'd change it up. We can do it slightly differently. So the title of my talk is Sound Constitutional Order, Burke, Kirk and Scruton. And straight away, those of you who read Kirk, and I know that you all do, will know that my title is essentially taken from an essay, a quite famous essay that Kirk wrote. And then I did my own innovative stuff. I know I'm a conservative, I shouldn't do such things. I added the Burke, Kirk and Scruton, so that's my intellectual contribution. Dr. Samuel Johnson said this: people need to be reminded more than they need to be instructed. So that is essentially the heart of my talk, is that it's a reminder. Hopefully, there's absolutely nothing new in this presentation for you, because that is the essence of conservatism. It is. Scruton got asked once, what is a conservative intellectual? Well, it's giving reasons not to have reasons, but also to ensure that the prejudices of the normal person, the everyday person, are actually correct. A prejudice in the Burkean term, prejudgment and all that sort of thing. So on with the show. There they are, by the way. Isn't that lovely? I got the old cravat. Start with this quotation. The aim of a good constitution is to achieve in society a high degree of political harmony so that order, justice, and freedom may be maintained. Who is that? Russell Kirk. Well done. I knew you knew that. So I'm trying to focus on the unwritten elements, the social norms, culture, conventions, and trying to tie it together with a look at common law and the idea of order. This is the most. And how do we know a constitution is sound? How can we go about doing that? Well, order is the first need of all. It is the most important. And it was interesting in the quotation that I gave you a moment, you noticed the order that I gave it to: order, justice, and freedom. That is explicitly written in that fashion. That formulation comes across over and over again in Kirk's work. It is order is the first need of all, justice, then freedom. So I'm going to try and tie that together. Freedom is the path that we follow. It provides us with purpose and meaning. And this is a great way. We're travelers away by this light, the great light of hope. So I like that's absolutely perfect quotation. Anyone who's stood up here and spoken to you know that the great light of hope is absolutely blinding, and I can't see a thing. What you're going down in there. I'm just assuming you're smiling, but I've got white dots going on. So this provides us with purpose and meaning. Beliefs and laws that require renewal of our understanding. This is the heart of the conservative tradition. This is what we're meant to be doing. It's renewing each generation after the next, renewing our understanding and passing that on again and again and again. Scruton, in his book Conservatism: An Invitation to the Great Tradition, he writes, conservatism is in its most recent adaptation, is about champion of Western civilization against its enemies. We learn from reading Kirk's book, The Roots of American Order, that the enemies to civilization is disorder and anarchy. And this ties into Scruton's reasonably famous, he said, all reasonable people can start off with the core premise of conservatism, and that is it's easier to lose good things than to create them. It's actually difficult, and the task of politics is therefore to protect the inherited institutions that we have from unnecessary experimentation. And then Scruton tries to give us his definition, roughly speaking. Essentially, his whole work is a definition of conservatism. Real conservatism is concrete freedom, the freedom that actually can be defined, claimed, granted, not in direct opposite of disobedience, but it's the other side of it. It's not an abstract, unreal freedom like the liberal intelligentsia, but or a childish disobedience to rules or duties. What actually that is an amplification of anarchy. So you can see that in both Kirk and Scruton, that this idea of that order is absolutely pivotal for freedom. But you insert something else before you get there in the I'm going to say equation. I'm going to say sound really abstract, but justice in there. And how can we look at orders? Where do we know where the American or Western civilization comes from? Well, we've got a wonderful framework to look for. Jerusalem, Athens, Rome, London. I know a little bit about London, Philadelphia, that we can look at. So Kirk provides us with this framework that we can look at and understand. Again, renewal of our understanding of where this comes from. Let me just a little bit. Jerusalem, a purposeful moral existence under God. Athens, about soul and order in civil society, are linked together. London, Magna Carta, common law, equity before the law, representative government, English language, the thing that I'm trying to communicate to you in, and more, and the founding documents. I think you've got some sort of anniversary coming up, a few days or something, haven't you? Something along those lines. So both Kirk and Scruton say this fundamentally comes from, you go to the very root, is freedom is rooted in the common law tradition. So let me give you, this is Kirk. Its origins, American personal liberty, perhaps owes more to common law. I put underlining in there, stressed it, common law, than any other single source. Common law is the footing for American law more broadly, rooted in custom and ancient usage. Again, this harmony comes in, the idea of it's about social harmony and security, creating security. Order creates security for you to thrive. It's very interesting that both Kirk and Scruton look back further than Burke when they look about and their ideas come from right back. We can go back to 1235 to the treatise by Henry de Bracken with his Laws and Customs of England. We can also look a little bit closer to home in the 18th century. Both Kirk and Scruton were influenced by William Blackstone. In his great book, America's British Culture, Kirk says Americans knew their Blackstone more than the English knew their Blackstone. They held it tight, they read it, and they drank at the well of Blackstone, his commentary on the laws of England. So we have a framework we can look at this through, but when someone says order, and you probably already thought about it, you probably think law and order comes in, law and order. Law is one piece of that overall order. We need other things such as traditions, norms, customs, beliefs, and habits that create order. Law is only one piece, but they create the whole. And then we've got Irving Bavitt. You can see the influence of Irving Bavitt about Kirk using the order in one's soul and order in one's civil society. And this is where I think Scruton comes in to help to flesh this out a bit, that you've got the virtue of the individual person, but where how do we get to that order in the Commonwealth? Yeah, we've become individuals, great citizens, we're virtuous now, and we somehow get a virtuous Commonwealth. But that's through interaction with other people, seeing other people as someone else and recognizing their humanity. Promises, like David Hume argues that the promise-keeping contracts all come from a daily interaction with people, and it grows. We create friendships and so on, and civil society groups, and we create conferences like this, golf clubs, baseball. I've just been watching it in the pub, tavern, place of eatery, whatever terminology you fancy using. And drawing on Tocqueville, let me just get, Kirk is influenced by him, of course, and you can see, let me just give you this. Liberty cannot be established without morality, or morality without faith. Faith plays a role, an important role. So, Kirk argues this, that let me quote, those framers must have some understanding of what Edmund Burke called the contract of external society. Many of you have heard it already, the today and yesterday, unborn, present, and the dead. And James E. Person Jr. also refers to how influential Burke was at this present time. So how can we analyze the soundness of this? How should we know when we should be panicking that something's wrong with our constitutional order? Well, we've got, again, Kirk provides us a framework, a 4-point framework to go with. I won't go through it all, but very quickly: good constitution, stability, continuity, divided political power, establish permanent arrangements, and accountability. Can we get rid of that person that we think has done a bad job? Can we get rid of them? That was one of the core things with Roger Scruton when he was so against the EU, is that, can we get rid of you? How can we get rid of you if you're not doing a good job? You couldn't.
But we did.
That's my favourite part of the conference. That's the only thing I'm going to tell people. They clapped. It's a Brexit, they clapped. Well, I'm happy. So, about the dead need to play a role in this. The dead need to play a role. They have a role to play. And I like Chesterton's, in his Ethics of Elfland, I love that he called it the democracy of the dead. People look at me when I start telling you about, we need to have the dead in politics. And I don't mean very, very old presidents. So, excuse me. Within democratic choices to take place, we need institutions and, of course, Think about it. We do it every day, though, don't we? We always say, what would Aunt Lind say about your new promotion? And they go, oh, she would be so pleased, wouldn't she? And they would go, yeah, she's so proud of me. So we do it all the time. But this order, this soundness, there is threats. There are threats. And let me go 2 minutes. I love the phrase Kirk referred to, used John Randolph of Roanoke's, the legislative maggot. I love this. And this is where politicians can insert bills, legislation, and that are not for the public good at all. They are for a particular group. They impose an ideology on the people, and it is for private interest for particular groups. And you got Roanoke, Randolph Roanoke saying this all back then, Kirk saying it still happens. We can see it when a bill goes through either our parliament or your Congress, or the people putting on their little things. So it's not for the public good. And this has a negative impact on common law, so much so that Kirk says that some statesmen don't even realize it even exists. Common law doesn't exist. But, and, oh, that's me. So there are threats to our constitutional order. It is sound, but we have to renew the culture. Thank you very much. Next up, we have Darrell Falconburg, who I had the great pleasure of meeting a couple of years ago. And when he was explaining to me about his doctoral dissertation about Kirk's vision, this is the title today, Kirk's vision of liberal education, I thought, I really can't wait to hear it expanded and when you get it published. You're working on that. I'm really glad. He's the academic program officer at the Russell Kirk Center, working on the book that I just mentioned, editing some Russell Kirk stuff on National Review, and he's published in Imaginative Conservative, which is a great website. Please go. So over to you.
Okay. Well, thanks, Dan. And I'll be focusing on the educational aspect of the panel for today. Russell Kirk is usually remembered as one of the foremost scholars and writers of the 20th century, and for good reason. Chief among his accomplishments was the publication of The Conservative Mind, which demonstrated that there is a distinctively conservative intellectual tradition in the Anglo-American world. At the time, this was a significant achievement. Only a few years earlier, the literary critic Lionel Trilling had observed that in America there was only one tradition, the liberal tradition. Conservatives, Trilling thought, lacked coherent and convincing ideas, offering little more than irritable mental gestures. Kirk, however, refuted this view. He showed that serious conservative thought did exist in the Anglo-American tradition. And then, in the years that followed, he went on to write other important works, such as Eliot in His Age, The Roots of American Order, and America's British Culture. In addition to his nonfiction, Kirk was also a gifted writer of ghostly fiction. Books and stories like Old House of Fear and Princess of All Lands were read by many people. As Kirk later put it in The Sword of Imagination, his autobiography, readers began to fancy that there were two scribbling Russell Kirks, one who wrote grave historical and political works and essays for the literary and scholarly journals, and another who wrote Old House of Fear and published uncanny tales. This afternoon, I want to suggest another way in which Kirk should be remembered, not only as a man of letters and fiction writer, but also as one of the 20th century's foremost defenders of liberal education. In particular, I think Kirk should be remembered as an educational thinker who recognized the vital connection between liberal learning and the conservation of a cultural and intellectual inheritance. Kirk's insights on education speak not only to scholars, but also to anyone concerned with how education shapes the character of a people and the future of a civilization. So at its core, Russell Kirk's educational vision was a rearticulation of the liberal arts tradition of Western civilization. This educational tradition had long held that learning was an intellectual means to an ethical end, which he would often repeat from Babbitt. Kirk's own educational vision drew especially from the thought of Edmund Burke, St. John Henry Newman, and Irving Babbitt. Among his contemporaries, he can be compared with writers like T.S. Eliot and Christopher Dawson. And in his educational writings, one thing that Kirk is doing is he's giving us this kind of lineage of conservative minds that inform the way we think about education. So this list of people I just gave can kind of be understood in that way. In contrast to figures like Bentham, Rousseau, Dewey, and other figures that Kirk would often be more critical of. Kirk's concern for the state of liberal education in America can be traced to some of his earliest writings. As far back as 1945, while serving in World War II, he penned an article for the South Atlantic Quarterly in which he defended liberal learning and diagnosed contemporary educational problems. So I'll quote Kirk. "Liberal education frees the mind. It also frees men. Why then have we scoffed and kicked liberal learning of the old school? Perhaps because of our national passion for novelty, new methods, progressive education," he has these in quotes, "that siren song of progress, but progress toward what? We have turned from the classics to the lathe because of our fetishes of creature comfort and material aggrandizement. We have forsworn the old ways because of our love of ease, for true learning is difficult to acquire, and modern studies, from sand pouring to hotel administration, require minimum effort. Our vices have betrayed us, our folly and our sloth have had their way, and now, when we need men of lofty mind, broad views, and stern integrity, we find ourselves a nation enamored of fads, fierce passion, and selfish materialism." As Kirk would later put it, the old tradition of liberal and humanistic studies was under threat, and with it, so was the modern West. Without an authentically liberal and humane education, contemporary civilization, Kirk worried, might not long endure. So again, as he wrote in 1954. "Where there is no liberal learning, in the long run there is no civilization, at least no civilization in our Christian and Western tradition. For some years and even generations after liberal learning has been extinguished in this country or that, the outward signs of civilization may remain, sustained by the dwindling intellectual capital of the generation that is passing, or by the borrowing the thought and moral standards of nations where something of the old grace of life survives. Yet, in the end, the mind of man stifles without the liberating influence of liberal learning." End quote. Convinced of the importance of education in renewing the modern West, Kirk would spend decades defending liberal learning and critiquing the errors of progressive education. After World War II, he taught for a time at Michigan State, but eventually resigned in frustration over the lowering of academic standards and the decline of academic freedom. And he would always call Michigan State Behemoth U as kind of a symbol of this. In 1955, he wrote a book titled Academic Freedom, tracing the roots of academic freedom to classical and Christian sources. In this book, Kirk argued that the freedom of the scholar is an inheritance that is worthy of conservation and a necessary condition for the academy to remain a place that seeks truth and wisdom. In Decadence and Renewal in the Higher Learning, 1978, Kirk provided an episodic history of higher education in America from 1953 to the present day of Kirk's lifetime. Kirk wrote more on the topic of education than any other single subject. He produced hundreds of articles, essays, and newspaper columns, including a regular biweekly column for National Review titled From the Academy, which he wrote for nearly a quarter century. And beyond his writings, he worked tirelessly for educational reform. He lectured widely, served as a visiting professor at numerous universities, advised foundations dedicated to educational renewal, founded a used bookshop, and became the president of the Educational Reviewer and the founding editor of the University Bookman, a quarterly publication devoted in its early issues to serious reviews and essays on education. Throughout his career, Kirk made the case that liberal education and cultural renewal are not peripheral to the conservative cause. They are, in fact, at the very heart of it. And liberal education itself, he showed time and again, is rightly understood as a conservative endeavor. As Kirk once put it, I am declaring that the task of the liberal educator, in essence, is a conservative labor. Kirk added, I am suggesting that colleges and universities ought not be degree mills. They ought to be centers for genuinely humane and genuinely scientific studies, attended by young people of healthy curiosity who actually show some interest in mind and conscience. I am saying that the higher learning is meant to develop order in the soul for the human person's own sake. I am saying that the higher learning is meant to develop order in the commonwealth for the republic's sake. In this sense, liberal education for Kirk embodied the best of the conservative spirit, preserving what is enduring and cultivating wisdom for the good of both the person and society. Now, it's important to make a clarification when we say that Kirk believed that liberal education has a conservative purpose. Because what Kirk is not saying is that we should be introducing constant debates and references to practical politics in the classroom, nor is he turning education into an ideological battleground. For Kirk, conservatism in education meant fostering an appreciation for what he, following T.S. Eliot, called the permanent things, the truths and moral norms that help us transcend the transient battles of partisan politics. A truly liberal education, in Kirk's view, is not about preparing young ideologues for partisan combat. Rather, it is about allowing students to find wisdom and virtue and helping them to appreciate the best of their cultural and intellectual inheritance. This vision of liberal education was most comprehensively expressed in his introduction to Irving Babbitt's Literature in the American College and within the pages of his book, Eliot and His Age. One of Kirk's most enduring educational insights was the formative power of literature and humane letters in shaping what he called the moral imagination, a term that he borrowed from Edmund Burke and Irving Babbitt. In Kirk's view, humane literature helps us to understand what it means to be truly human. Such books help to shape our knowledge of human nature, not through didactic instruction or through sermonizing, but through allegory, metaphor, and poetic insight. In this way, humane literature forms character and helps to order the soul. Modern education, in contrast, had often been starving the moral imagination, replacing it with utilitarianism, ideological slogans, and a concern for relevance. That's like the phrase is this relevance to pop culture. Restoring literature to its central place in education, Kirk believed, was essential to recovering a truly humane civilization. We might put it another way and say that to defend an authentically liberal education is to conserve and renew the best of the Western and Christian traditions, or again, the permanent things that make us truly human. At its best, Kirk showed that education is liberal precisely because it is conservative. It frees souls because it forms them in the best of a cultural and intellectual heritage. It liberates precisely because it hands down to posterity all that is true and good and permanent. It forms leaders in all walks of life who can serve as leaven precisely because they have the wisdom and virtue of the past at their disposal. Such an education binds the rising generation to what Edmund Burke called the eternal society, a communion of souls that includes the living, the dead, and the unborn. And like T.S. Eliot, education for Kirk was the principle of continuity, was an instrument of continuity in a civilization. And like Dawson, he believed that education is the passing down of a culture. So through his writing, editing, and other educational endeavors, Kirk's contribution to the educational arena were great. But the fullest expression of his educational vision can be seen in the work that he and his wife, Annette Kirk, undertook in their home, Piety Hill in Mecosta, Michigan. For decades, thousands of students, scholars, and visitors came to Piety Hill to engage in liberal learning infused with a conservative disposition. Roger Scruton, as we heard earlier today, was himself among such scholars and visitors. Kirk's home and independent library became over time a bastion of liberal education shaped by a conservative cast of mind. Seminars frequently took place where students would gather to learn from Dr. Kirk and other professors. They would enjoy informal conversation and fellowship, as well as hospitality in Kirk's own family house. Through seminars and mentoring, Kirk created a living model of liberal education rooted in tradition, place, and hospitality. In contrast to the utilitarian and ideological tendencies of the modern academy, Kirk's home advanced the kind of liberal studies that link the generations together in the wisdom of the past. For Kirk, it was the task of the 20th century conservative to reawaken the modern world to what it means to be human, and by extension to recenter education on the inner development of the person. Education didn't simply need a few tweaks or adjustments if it was to fend off the decay of humane civilization and human personality, as Kirk put it. In this, the thinking conservative must be radical. He must strike at the roots of this preservation of learning. For in most of our state-sponsored schools nowadays, and probably in the great part of our universities and colleges, the educational process has become inimical to the real human person." End quote. According to this view, what was needed was educational reform and a return to the educational aims that were common before the 20th century, before the rise of the Benthamites and Deweyites in American learning. So these ideas, I believe, are worth recovering today. Kirk isn't usually known as an educational thinker, but he should be. These educational insights can continue to guide us, and the reason is simple: that they are probably some of the most insightful conservative contributions to educational and cultural renewal in America. Such ideas should be recovered and championed again, especially now when education so often forgets its purpose. And in an age when education is often reduced to job training or ideological indoctrination, we need voices that remind us of what liberal studies are really for. And one of those voices, often overlooked, but more needed than ever, is Russell Kirk.
Wonderful.
Very good. Very good.
Great. Thank you, Darrell. That was great. And he said eternal society correctly first time. So that was wonderful. I stumbled over that one. So well done. Next up was actually, if I may say something slightly just personal, I've really looking forward to this talk for about 2 years. When I first met Ben and we had this idea for this conference, he was, you want your star players on the pitch, and I couldn't wait to hear this. So Ben Lockard, he's a professor of English at Grand Valley State University, right here. Written some great books, A Sacred Marriage. My favorite bit of Ben's writing is his introduction to Eliot and his age. He's also written an introduction to Russell Kirk's Enemy of the Permanent Things. Read them, they're great. And he's also edited a collection of essays of T.S. Eliot's Christian tradition. And Ben has opened my world to Dawson. So I'm looking forward to this. Thank you very much.
think I'll stand too. Yes, I was surprised to hear from Daniel that that Dawson's less well known in England than here. But that will soon be remedied, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And I want to add one thing to my resume, and that is that I was a member of the dissertation committee for Dr. Falconburg. During his post-conversion years, Eliot thought long and hard about questions of culture, and his primary interlocutor on the topic was the historian Christopher Dawson. The influence of Dawson on Eliot has long been known. Indeed, Eliot acknowledged it repeatedly himself. In her biography of Dawson, Christina Scott highlights a time when Eliot was lecturing in the United States and was asked what writer was the most powerful intellectual influence in England. He answered, Christopher Dawson. Russell Kirk, in his book on Eliot, declared, of social thinkers in his own time, none influenced Eliot more than Dawson. Yet, Kirk did not elaborate, and later critics mostly ignored the connection. Here I wish to focus on just one idea on which Eliot and Dawson were united, the belief that culture was important in ways and in some ways prior to politics. This is a common idea in our circles today. And that education was the way that culture was passed on. I will just begin to show how Kirk and Scruton developed these ideas further in their own time. As the shadows of communism and fascism fell over Europe in the 1930s, Dawson wrote a book entitled Beyond Politics, published in 1939. As the title implies, Dawson suggests that the immense problems Europe was facing could not be solved by politics alone. He essentially argues that cultural order is primary and political order secondary. In the same year, Eliot published The Idea of a Christian Society, and in the preface he names Dawson's book as one of the major influences on his own. Throughout the next decade, Eliot continued to work out his cultural ideas, which were developed, as were Dawson's, in relation to anthropological principles. The culmination of his thinking was expressed in Notes Towards the Definition of Culture, 1948, and again in the preface to that book he acknowledges a particular debt to Dawson. Given their emphasis on the priority of culture, what solutions do these two propose? Well, not very good ones. That is, they don't have a neat 10-point plan that could be easily implemented. Their proposals are explicitly not political, but they put forward ideas that are beyond politics. Here's what Dawson suggests early in the book. If Western civilization is to be saved, it is necessary to find some way of removing the divided aims, the lack of social discipline, and the absence of national unity that are the weaknesses of democracy, without falling under the tyrannous of dictatorship and the fanatical intolerance of a totalitarian party. And we cannot do this by politics alone. No constitutional change will touch the roots of our weakness, for it is the life of society, and not merely the government of society, that needs reordering. This is a clear statement of his thesis in the entire work. The problems are societal ones, primarily, and the solutions must primarily address the life of society and only secondarily the government of society. Eliot sums up this stance succinctly. What we are seeking, he says, is not a program for a party, but a way of life for a people. This foreshadows the thinking of Scruton and Kirk, who spent much time in their political writings on the humanities. As Scruton put it, cultural conservatism in all its forms has been an attempt to lift conservatism from the battleground of politics into the peaceful arena of literature and academic life. One extra political domain these thinkers emphasized was that of education, since it is the means of transmitting the cultural heritage of the past. Eliot declared, "A nation's system of education is much more important than its system of government. Only a proper system of education can unify the active and contemplative life, action and speculation, politics, and the arts." Hence, he states that those who sympathize with Mr. Dawson in resenting the tyranny of politics must direct their attention to the problem of education. He devotes the last chapter of Notes to educational ideas because of the close association, he says, in many minds between education and culture. Dawson wrote about education throughout his career, and he summed up his thoughts in one of his last books, The Crisis of Western Education, 1961, written when he was teaching at Harvard. At the beginning of the book, he asserts that it is clear that culture is inseparable from education, since education in the widest sense of the word is what the anthropologists term enculturation. That is, the process by which culture is handed on by the society and acquired by the individual. The entire book is premised on this insight, that education is essential to the transmission of culture. Scruton comes to the same conclusion, and I haven't heard of any reference by Scruton to Dawson. I asked Dan about it, and he didn't find anything. I'd be interested to know if anybody comes across that. But I think Scruton basically worked these ideas out for himself. The values implicit in the pursuit of education, he says, or in the participation in any such autonomous arrangement, cannot necessarily be reduced to a code of conduct, a system of rules, or an ideal of the good for man. They consist rather in an intimation of a human world and of access to that world through understanding. Hence, the idea of education coexists with that of culture. There are two closely related problems with education, according to Dawson and Eliot and Kirk and Scruton, in our modern era. Education has become largely a state monopoly, and the turn towards practicality and specialization in education has pushed aside the liberal arts. Eliot points out that the demand for universal education has led to lower standards and to a takeover by the state. He bemoans the displacement of the family in education, saying, "Instead of congratulating ourselves on our progress whenever the school assumes another responsibility hitherto left to parents, we might do better to admit that we have arrived at a stage of civilization at which the family is irresponsible or incompetent or helpless, at which parents cannot be expected to train their children properly, at which many parents cannot afford to feed them properly and would not know how, even if they had the means, and that education must step in and make the best of a bad job." Of course, we see this tendency being pushed to the limits today. Kirk spends much time deploring the move toward increasing the number of university students after World War II. By 1953, he writes, "It was clear that many university administrators were bent upon increasing enrollments enormously, at whatever cost to academic achievement standards." And Scruton says simply, "It is not possible to provide universal education, nor is it desirable." The second problem Dawson and Eliot noticed was the trend towards specialization and utility in the educational system. As the state tightened its grip on education, an increasing number of specialties developed, gradually minimizing liberal arts education. As Dawson puts it, the old humanistic education taught all that it knew about the civilization of ancient Greece and Rome and taught little else. In the 19th century, this aristocratic and humanist ideal was gradually replaced by the democratic utilitarianism of compulsory state education, on the one hand, and by the ideal of scientific specialization on the other. Eliot speaks of this trend rather sardonically. He says, "And just as those who should be the intellectuals regard theology as a special study, like numismatics or heraldry, with which they need not concern themselves, and theologians observe the same indifference to literature and art as special studies which do not concern them, so our political classes regard both fields as territories of which they have no reason to be ashamed of remaining in complete ignorance. Kirk criticized the compartmentalization of knowledge, leading at best to the development of elites unable to communicate with one another. Since it is primarily the liberal arts disciplines that perform the task of transmitting culture, the ascendancy of a plethora of specialized fields becomes a problem. They also argue that liberal arts education must fully acknowledge and explore the centrality of Christianity to the Western cultural tradition. The education in Christian culture they proposed was not an indoctrination or an attempt to convert. In Eliot's words, the purpose of a Christian education would not be merely to make men and women pious Christians. A system which aimed too rigidly at this alone would become only obscurantist. A Christian education would primarily train people to be able to think in Christian categories, though it could not compel belief and would not impose the necessity of insincere profession of belief. What is suggested in an academic study involving history, philosophy, literature, and art, but highlighting the Christian tradition in which all Western thought occurred. Dawson makes a fairly detailed proposal for this approach. He concedes that it's not possible to reinstate theology as the queen of the sciences. However, he says, what I do believe very strongly is that the time has come to consider the possibility of introducing the study of Christian culture as an objective historical reality into the curriculum of university studies. This objective approach, treating the subject as an academic one, would presumably make the Christian tradition accessible to those who know little about it, which includes many Christians. Excuse me. Wait a minute. Perfect. What this suggests is that a renewal of the liberal arts needs to take full account of the role of religion in the making of Europe, the title of another book by Dawson. He says, a curriculum in Christian culture would embrace a cooperative study of Christian philosophy, Christian literature, and Christian history. Dawson looked to liberal arts colleges, and especially Catholic ones, to lead the way. Neither Eliot nor Dawson was particularly sanguine about the likelihood of success for their propositions. Near the end of notes towards the definition of culture, Eliot famously laments, in our headlong rush to educate everybody, we are lowering our standards and more abandoning the study of those subjects by which the essentials of our culture, of that part of it which is transmissible by education, are transmitted, destroying our ancient edifices to make ready the ground upon which the barbarian nomads of the future will encamp in their mechanized caravans. It's kind of a Mad Max vision. Dawson seems to echo this dispiriting vision near the end of his book on education. He names some of the horrors visited on their nations by the totalitarian governments of the time and concludes thus, but what is most alarming in these developments is the way in which this reversion to barbarism has been associated with technological advance. Indeed, the new barbarism is itself technological, inasmuch as the whole system of propaganda and persecution, mass trials and concentration camps represents a carefully thought-out technique for ensuring social conformity and remaking mankind after some new ideological pattern. Nor did he think the democracies, which were even more advanced technologically, were immune to the totalitarian tendencies of the age, speaking of the possibility of a democratic totalitarianism, a phrase Eliot echoes. Yet, neither of them gave up hope. And of course, Kirk is famous for giving long, dispiriting talks and then saying, yet cheerfulness will break through. At the end of notes, Eliot offers some gray light. But, he says, we can at least try to save something of those goods of which we are the common trustees. the legacy of Greece, Rome, and Israel, and the legacy of Europe throughout the last 2,000 years. This recalls surely a line from the end of a famous poem of his, "These fragments I have shored against my ruins." Dawson expresses some similar hope, warning that spiritual renewal cannot be brought about by purely emotional revivals. But a complete change of spiritual orientation cannot be effective unless it takes place on a deep psychological level. It cannot be had for the asking. It can only be reached by a long and painful journey through the wastelands. So the wasteland barbarian theme keeps going. But Dawson's last words are somewhat more encouraging, and we'll end with those. So long as the Christian tradition of higher education still exists, the victory of secularism, even in a modern technological society, is not complete. There is still a voice to bear witness to the existence of the forgotten world of spirituality in which man has his true being.
He's very good.
Thanks, Ben. That was wonderful. We turn now to Matt Beech. His title is University Education. So wonderfully carrying on in a time of cultural wars, lessons from Kirk and Scruton. Matt is a reader in politics and the director of the Centre for British Politics, University of Hull. He's also a senior fellow at UC Berkeley on this side of the pond. He's written many books and co-edited. He's got a new one coming out with Philip Blond on Margaret Thatcher.
Philip Norton.
Yeah, Norton. It was only my PhD supervisor. I can't remember his name. Coming out, and he's just had a book on Raymond Plant as well, published. Over to you, Matt.
Well, thank you, Dan. First of all, thank you so much to the Kirk Centre and to Ludovica University. Thank you to Jeff. Thank you to Ferenc and to you, Dan, for the invitation. It's a real privilege to be at a gathering here of some friends, some new acquaintances, and like-minded people, people who care about the preservation of the permanent things. So it's just a joy to be here. My first time in Michigan. This is now my 15th state I think I visited. So my kids are quite glad that Daddy's ticking them off one by one. So that's great. And it doesn't count if you just get a connecting flight in a state. That doesn't count, doesn't it?
Correct.
You've got to have had dinner or had a conversation or, something like that. Or gone on holiday. So, in a way, I'm going to have to be on and off with these things because I'm getting to that age. These are brand new glasses because I'm getting to that age where I have to do this. I think what I want to say today, I'm not going to read a paper. It's not my practice. It wasn't how I was trained, although it was a wonderful practice. And it's been so great to hear the quality of the works read today, the papers read, and the precision of language and the rhetorical flourishes and the tight conclusions drawn. So I think the scholarship on this side of the pond is excellent. So it's just wonderful to hear that. But it's not my way. It's not how I was trained by Lord Plant. And so I will. I have done my reading and I have my arguments, and I'm going to just talk and then make some observations and then suggest. I don't know. Well, once I've made my diagnosis, I'm going to offer a prescription. Well, and whether you choose to take that prescription is up to you, but all liability is on yourself. Anyway, so I guess many of us in this room are either university teachers, or we've been through college, or we are perhaps doctoral candidates, or we are adjacent to higher education. And we all therefore know that the culture wars are real, the culture wars are on our campuses. Probably, it's fair to say, in a sense, historically, from the study of culture wars, when James Davison Hunter's book first came out, first time really to sort of like popularize that term, you could say that the culture wars really occur on campus, and they occur in the minds of intellectuals in the post-war era, and in the incredibly influential books and academic journal series and that they publish. And who are the they, Matt? You're saying they. Well, I don't want to be too partisan in the sense that a war has to have belligerents and co-belligerents. So it can't just be one person fighting against himself. That's the pathology. It's not really a war. And so, yes, I guess what I'm really getting at when I refer to culture wars, I'm not talking about the healthy disagreement that liberals and conservatives have on a whole manner of things. Division and difference is not polarization. Polarization is a special thing. It's a different category. Polarization is a necessary opposition of worldviews. I think what I mean and understand when I talk about culture wars is where we have not two branches of the same family, maybe once removed, a cranky uncle and an odd second cousin disagreeing about certain things. I guess what I mean when I talk about culture wars is where you've had different civilizational projects proposed in the West, in the post-war era, by incredibly influential intellectuals right across the world in general, in particular the Anglosphere. And in my own country, I might think of the Communist Party History Group, with the likes of Eric Hobsbawm and E.P. Thompson and Dorothy Thompson and Donna Torr and John Saville, Christopher Hill. But you could also, and we should also think about the Frankfurt School, and we should think about the likes of not just Adorno and Horkheimer, but particularly, I think, much more influentially, Herbert Marcuse. And then to some extent, although thank goodness, didn't have a great deal of landing in philosophy in Britain, had a dreadful impact on the humanities in terms of English literature. You have the post-structuralists of the like of Michel Foucault and Jacques Derrida et al., and on. So these are the kind of intellectuals and these kind of people who are seeking to remake society. They're seeking to move on from a classical Marxist class-based revolution, and they're seeking to engage intellectual young people on the campus through books. Now, I don't want to talk any more about that because I think we all know that story. The story I want to talk about is what's happening now on our campuses, and how should we perhaps respond? That's the prescription. So what is happening now on campuses? Well, we have huge debates about the parameters of lawful speech. Now, of course, we friends from different countries in this room, predominantly Americans. There might be some Canadians. There are some Brits. There are some Hungarians, and everywhere else. But in Britain and America, there's different jurisprudential cultures and territories, and so lawful speech and the parameters thereof are protected by different things, either by a constitutional mechanism in one sense, or by statute, let alone common law in England. And that is really the area of contestation. The great area of contestation in culture wars and universities is around speech, because thought is primary, speech is secondary, but speech is a very early secondary for all human interaction, let alone education. Thought comes first. Speech is the outworking of that thought. So the cultural pressures that students feel on the campuses is because that someone has said to them, you ought not say that, or you ought not to have that opinion, or they might say to the professor, that book ought not to be taught, or we shouldn't hire that person. We shouldn't hire them, but they're excellently credentialed. Yes, I know, but they don't think the right things, and they give donations to the wrong organizations and things like that. So this is the actual stuff, the actual bones of some of the cultural issues. It's around speech, it's around thought, but it's also around the nature of the university itself. And I think Jonathan Haidt and Greg Lukianoff are right about this, and about the coddling of the American mind, when they say that and when Haidt said initially, particularly when he did that lecture back in sort of 1617, I think it was at Duke University, when he made the point about the nature, the telos of the Western university, but particularly in North America, is changing from one that has sought to liberty of the academic, very much in that kind of Kirkian sense of pursuing truth, and just whether that's aesthetic truth, scientific truth, or where we're trying to rank stronger and weaker poetry, or whatever it might be, that sense of truth, which is ensconced in an understanding of the scholar, teacher, and the liberty of his work, of her work, and the student to take that option module, that upper class module, and to pursue it, versus a model of, as they say, the social justice U. In other words, that the university starts with a whole range of normative perspectives. Now, I'll give you one example. You might think this is a little bit trite, but it's the sort of thing that gets my goat. My own university, the University of Hull, which I'm very glad to be employed in, and I've got wonderful colleagues, has the Ukrainian flag flying from it. Now, I have huge personal sympathy with the plight of Ukrainians in the conflict with Russia, absolutely. But I don't think it's the proper business of a public university in England to raise the flag of any other country apart from the United Kingdom. I would be fine with it also having St. George's flag, because Kingston upon Hull, last time I checked, is in England. That's also fine. The nation of England is not a country, it's a nation. And I'm absolutely fine with also flying the city flag, or at the flag of the East Riding of Yorkshire. That's also fine, because that is the first person plural, as Sir Roger would say. That is the we. So it doesn't matter whether you're from Nigeria, like some of our MA students are, or whether you're from Vietnam, or whether you're from Oman, or whether you're from Hungary and you're a student at the University of Hull. By being a student at the university, you are part of the we. You're part of that community, and that's wonderful. It should be intellectual in the proper liberal sense of our open liberal education. What we should not be doing, and what our university administrators should not do, for it is not their business, is be raising the flags of other countries on their buildings. Even if we, and I'm going to assume that most of my faculty colleagues have a disposition towards the plight of the Ukrainian people in the war against Putin's Russia. Now, I'm just giving that as an example of social justice, of like a social justice take, or in other words, or activism take that the university ought not do. So that's one. I think there's about speech. There's something there about the social justice university. There's also, we all know this, there's a whole range of subjects which are just kind of, sort of like ruled off or forbidden or what have you. Whole debate in the United Kingdom has been about sort of gender ideology. That's been a huge one. For a couple of years ago, it was about BLM and critical race theory and all those sorts of things. And so this is the milieu, this is the atmosphere, this is the climate in which young men and women are trying to navigate study and proper thinking. And this is serious. So what can be done? Well, if we take the work of Sir Roger, if we take the work of Russell Kirk, they both wrote a lot about education, as has been said. They wrote huge amounts about the culture and cultural conflict. So it can't be summarized in about 4 minutes or 3 minutes or however long I've got left. But what I can say, I think, is I think we can draw from their traditions a range of things that are a prescription for the future, are a prescription for, especially those of us in this room who might be in more hostile environments. So I was talking to Bracey, my friend Bracey. Now, Bracey's at Christendom. Now, Bracey doesn't have some of those issues that I face at Hull. He does it, just the nature of it, the size of it, the Catholic, conservative nature of it. Dan's at Buckingham, or Buckingham is the only private university we have in the United Kingdom, in England, I beg pardon. And Mrs. T helped sort of set it up and everything. Now, they have had their issues. They've had their issues with their Vice-Chancellor, and he's not, all of that's been sorted out. But it's less of an issue at Hull. I don't know, maybe friends would say in the Q&A, I don't imagine in Ludovica some of these things are quite as spicy as they are perhaps at if you're a conservative at Berkeley, or if you're in Hull, or if you're at Oxford, right? Okay, yeah, you know where I'm going with this. So what's the prescription? We've got a mixed economy of people and their experiences as conservatives, who have conservative students or classical liberal students in the culture war. So what's this prescription that you can draw, Matt, from these two traditions of Sir Roger and from Russell Kirk? Well, I think the first thing is, and we do this, and I think this conference has been testament to this point, take ideas seriously. You take the ideas of your interlocutors, whether it's your, as Dan likes to do on Twitter sometimes, here are my top 10 thinkers that have influenced me, here are my top 5 conservative thinkers. He likes to do that, that's fine. But you take ideas seriously of the people you should be reading liberally. You should be reading people who challenge your ideas. You should be reading people who challenge your theological, religious, political perspective. To read the canon is not one thing. Whatever subject you're in, the Western canon is not hermetically sealed. It has room for entry. Some things we discard and we bring back in. And the canon doesn't have a particular perspective. That's why all these folks get themselves tied up in knots about the canon is somehow this dreadful thing. No one has sat to begin with to think, okay, the Western canon, it has to have people of this perspective or that perspective. It isn't itself intellectually diverse. And we should be people who want not just to encourage our students to read canonical books, but we should also be people who should say that in and of itself is a way to model what proper learning and proper education is. It's not being fearful of people who have different views to ourselves. Take ideas seriously. Keep the conversation going. What do you mean? It's very easy in faculty. It's very easy in a classroom to stop talking to people who disagree with you. I don't talk to them, they're Democrats, or I don't talk to them because they're voting green. No, that's not healthy, that's no good. Also, those of us who are parents, we can learn the fact that people change their mind over time. Children change their mind. If children didn't change their mind, we wouldn't keep trying to instruct them until they do what we want them to do. People change their mind. People change their mind. Keep the conversation going. Okay, perfect, nearly done. Model those local practices that you want to see. So my good friend here, my colleague Chris Fear, when he's just sets up his new course called Political Thought of the Right, he gets students to read pretty much only primary texts. So he's modeling that which he wants. Okay, and this is the last two things I want to say. Number one, you've got to enjoy it. You've got to be positive and you've got to enjoy it. Yes, there is a place of being, having a rearguard action. And often in a lot of the big public universities and the elite private schools, people who think like we do are in the absolute minority, and many aren't getting hired, and many of these brilliant doctoral students are not going to get hired in places like that. But where we find ourselves, be positive. Enjoy it. I think wouldn't that be great if there was it's sort of like a traditional conservative perspective. And you can see this in Roger Scruton and Russell Kirk. These men love their work and they love their life. That's quite infectious. It's quite attractive to see people enjoying the debate and the learning. It fires people up. You've got to enjoy it. They're going to be hard. There are hard tasks and hard days. You've got to enjoy it. And finally, I think the thing about it for me, the last thing I want to say is that we don't fully appreciate the impact that we have. We're often not given a vantage point to see the impact we have. Well, Matt, I'm the only conservative in my faculty out of 30, 40 people. I know it's a very hostile environment. It's difficult. And sure, it is difficult. But the bottom line is that you don't know the impact that you have on your students, on that doctoral candidate, on that undergraduate. You don't know what they're going to go on to do. And the fact that you've been a lone voice, like Harvey Mansfield or something like that, you don't know the impact you'll have. So be positive, be optimistic, model the local practices you want to see to conserve and preserve the best of liberal learning, the best of the permanent things. Thanks very much.
Could we please do usual